Davison, at the end of my time at St. Joe's, I realized that I didn't feel like I knew enough what it was that I wanted to do, and I didn't want to leave Philly yet. So I decided to do my AmeriCorps year through a program called Fen Fellows that's organized by Penn. How it works is you spend a year at a nonprofit organization. It's really great. Fend and Penn, they pay, they give you a rent stipend, they give you a SEPTA pass, they help you pay for meals and travel. So everything's covered, and you enter a management role at a local nonprofit, which is something that a typical 22-year-old wouldn't be able to do. So during my time with this program, I worked for Philadelphia Legal Assistance, which is a public interest law firm in Center City. If anyone's pre-law and you're interested in internships, I still consult with them. So please feel free to reach out to me about that. I'm happy to make introductions. Um, it was a phenomenal place to work. I still often call it my favorite job. I was the coordinator of the organization's medical legal partnership, or MLP. MLP is basically when public interest law firms place lawyers and paralegals in low income health centers and public hospitals around the city. And it's really, really cool. It allows low income people who have shift work, are busy, have kids, to be able to receive legal care they wouldn't be able to afford otherwise in their neighborhood. And they're typically referred by a provider that they trust. So, really great program. And while I was there, I did a little bit of everything, as is the nonprofit way. But primarily, I did a lot of coordination. So, who does what, when, and where, some strategic work. Who are we funded by? Who are we trying to be funded by in the next year? How are we expanding our program to serve multiple health centers? And a lot of writing. So when I think of my skills, I'm really a grant writer and a technical writer at heart. I really like communicating externally. And this first job out of college is where I really honed those skills, and I've used them in every single role since then.
Amazing. Wow, that's a lot. That's a lot to take in. Just to clarify, did you say Fen program?
It's Fend, Phennd. I never heard about it while I was at St. Joe's. I happened upon it Googling, and I'm really happy that I.
I think I've seen that. That's why I wanted to clarify the spelling of the PH instead of F. Great. My next question was about the skills that you landed, or that you used in landing your early roles. Since you answered that, I'm wondering if you can sort of walk us through how you came to have 4 opportunities when most of us graduating are like, we just want one, that's it. How did
Um,
you sort of set yourself up for that?
I feel two ways about this. In part of me, I think I was 22 at the time, so my 22-year-old self was really proud of myself and happy to have those opportunities. And my older self, I'm 27 now, I didn't really need to have all of those opportunities. It is okay to just have one. It is okay to have none and spend the summer figuring it out. I did put a lot of stress on myself to know exactly what I was doing after graduation. And if you can avoid doing that, I would recommend it. That said, I was paying my own rent during undergrad. I knew I would pay my own rent after undergrad too. I had a little bit of extra pressure to know how I was going to make bills. But all through college, I did internships, and not just internships where you work somewhere that sounds nice and kind of sit around all summer. I did a lot of really hands on learning experiences. One of the major ones was that I think it was my sophomore year. Yeah, my sophomore year. To pay my rent, honestly, I started interning at Women's Campaign International, which is a very small international development nonprofit, also downtown in Center City. They take interns, write that down. And I started writing grants, which is a really important skill for nonprofits. And it's also very, very profitable. And by the time I had graduated, I had garnered this organization hundreds of thousands of dollars in funding. And I was able to show that in my applications, talk about that in my interviews. And it definitely made a difference. There are lots of other skills that made me stand out. It sounds silly, but if you're thinking about nonprofit work, they typically don't have somebody running their social media. If you can do that, you're more likely to get hired than someone who's not. Um, the end of my time at St. Joe's, I realized that I didn't know a coding language, which, if you're thinking about research, it can be really important to know. And I was graduating when Dr. Bucci was joining the faculty. And I explained to her that I was worried about the skills gap. And she sat with me over the course of 5 days, um, and just kind of showed me how to do the basics. And then I, over the summer, taught myself. That also helped me, one, get into grad school, but also with some future roles.
Wow, amazing. Great. Um, so we talk a lot about networking. Last week, our whole class was about networking. Can you talk about networking a little bit, and if you use that as part of your strategy to land one or more of those roles? And if so, how would you recommend students go about that if you have any suggestions?
Absolutely. I'm going to preface this by saying that I believe in a world where people get jobs and get into schools based on what they do and not who they know. That said, it's not the world that we live in. And I think it's really important that I say that out loud. Um, my first job I got because I was lucky, right? I applied to the AmeriCorps program. I got in, I got the organization that I wanted to work for. My two jobs since then, I have gotten because I knew somebody. And I try to be really, really transparent about that. So after 2.5 years of working at Philadelphia Legal Assistance, 1 year as an AmeriCorps member, and then a year and a half as a permanent employee, I decided to move on. And I did that because the boss of one of my AmeriCorps colleagues, someone else in my program, recruited me. They had a job open. He had met me at an event. He thought Erin would probably be great for this. Let's see if she'll apply. And I did, and I got the role. And then I worked at that nonprofit when I decided to leave in August. That manager, he had left. His husband called me and said, "Hey, I heard you're thinking about leaving too. I have a job for you. Do you want to apply?" Um, and I think just really speaks to personal connections are really important. Consider your classmates, your future colleagues. If you do a fellowship program, people in your cohort might be the exact folks that get you a future job, whether it's a year down the line or 5 years down the line. Keep in contact with your professors. They're still giving you recommendations. Dr. Baglioni and Dr. Fugoka have written every single recommendation I've ever needed, and they've had countless phone calls with future employers, just talking about the kind of student that I was or the kind of person that I am. I also keep in contact with all of my former managers. So my first manager that I wrote grants for when I was 19 ended up working with me at the legal services organization when I was 23. Those relationships don't just go away because you leave an organization or because you age or things change, and you don't want them to. Anyone you know will be willing to help you, and it's always worth just shooting an email and saying like, "Hey, I haven't heard from you in a while. Do you want to get coffee?" It's okay if you have nothing important to ask them or talk about. Just catching up can be really, really nice and make them think of you down the line.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I will take issue with one thing you said though. It doesn't sound like you only got the job because of who you know. um they have a history of your work ethic, of the quality of your work. So yes, you know them, but you also have that experience with them. So I don't think
Absolutely.
they would have reached out if they thought like she's a nice woman, but it ends there, right?
And to rephrase, I am really good at what I do. It's how I have a consulting business now. I'm not humble, I will say that. But
I love it.
my current employer, right, if they had 10 candidates in front of them and I'm the one candidate that knows the hiring manager, it's going to give me a little boost, whether the hiring manager means it to or not. And it's something important to consider. And as you consider making those connections, don't shy away from them, lean into them because it's only going to help you.
Absolutely. Yep. And that's why we promote it so heavily, because there's that sort of unspoken, like, oh, I know her. I've seen her, the quality of her work. I've seen, her commitment to work, and that, they have a little bit more history about wow, she's been doing this since she's 19. Maybe they don't know that about another candidate. But I look at it this way: those other candidates all have the same opportunity to network as you do. And if they haven't, or they've chosen not to, it's just extra feather. Sorry. Or something. I don't know if you can hear that. Thanks, Evan. Great. Well, thank you. Yeah, we always talk about networking. It's always a hot topic. Um, so kind of shifting gears a little bit, Erin, what are ways, that another hot topic always is diversity, equity, and inclusion. And can you talk about the ways that your current organization, or even just your industry as a whole, has demonstrated a commitment to diversity?
Sure, yeah. So I'll talk about the educational industry because that's what I'm currently working in. But if anybody has any specific questions about public health, that is what I'm studying. I'm getting my master's at Temple. So feel free to ask more specific questions about that. Um, I would say there's a growing trend of acknowledging and talking about the ways in which education in our country is inequitable. At American Reading Company, the ways that I'm most familiar with that is how literacy and the ways that we have taught children how to read in this country have been racist. There's a lot of research behind this about what kind of schools get decent, good quality reading instruction and what schools don't. And there are teachers and administrators and policymakers all over the country that are doing incredible work to shift and make changes in this space. Governor Shapiro here in Pennsylvania has some really great initiatives that are aiming to bring quality curriculum, like the one that my company creates, to schools all over the state, and also making sure that the teachers that deliver that curriculum are professionally developed, that they have skills, and also that they represent the communities that they teach in. So just this morning, I was writing a policy memo about an initiative that Governor Shapiro is trying to get passed that would create extra grant funding for Black and Brown future educators, especially men. Um, there are things like this all over the country. I'm just particularly proud of Pennsylvania because that's the state that we're all in. And I do a lot of my work in Pennsylvania locally. I also, American Reading Company, our books represent the students who read them. Our curriculum is in English and Spanish. And I don't mean it's in English and translated to Spanish. We have a whole curriculum written in Spanish by Spanish teachers that take in the nuance of what that language is instead of just asking learners to use a kind of easy translation. It sounds simple, but it's really, really meaningful. Um, I can think of more things. If you have more follow-up questions or specific things about DE&I, feel free to ask as well.
Yeah, thank you. No, I mean, that's so applicable, just that information about the Spanish language, right? As opposed to just as a direct translation. I meet with a lot of students that are bilingual in Spanish, and sometimes they try to direct translate. I'm like, just say it, it's fine. I'll figure it out. So that is a great example of how you're applying it. um so since you've been in sort of a couple different areas, you can answer this based on whichever one you want, but is there something that you wish you knew, I guess, about working in general, or specifically within any of the industries, and that could go back to when you were a student, like, oh, this is what the real world looks like. Like, what is it that took you by surprise, or that you kind of had wished you'd known ahead of time?
I wonder if this is something that the poli-sci or IR students in this class can relate to. When I was at St. Joe's, I thought that I had to pick an issue that I was really passionate about or an industry that I was really interested in, and that would be it forever. And I've really learned that hard skills are more important than industry know how. I've worked across three, four industries now in the last 4 years. And it is my hard skills that have carried me through, along with my just like desire to learn new things. Not that I know everything there is to know about the education or healthcare or legal services industry. So, as you're thinking about what it is that you want to do, it can be really hard to get that first job in the industry that you want, but there might be an adjacent industry where there's a perfect role that you're qualified for and where you would learn a lot. Go through that, learn the skills you need to know. And then if you want to make a shift, you can. Um, you have a lot of time. And I really think it's important to center that as you're thinking about your next steps.
So just as a follow-up to that, I mean, you mentioned some of the skills that you've gained. Are there any that you would recommend for sophomores, some juniors, some seniors, um, in political science and international relations to kind of focus on right now?
Yeah, I was actually with a bunch of poli sci and IR alumni this weekend. who live between like Philly, New York, and DC. And one thing I notice about the lovely cohort of folks that I've graduated with is that everybody seems to be writing a lot or talking a lot. So your department really sets you up for this, how to be an effective communicator, a persuasive communicator, and how to write really well. I think it's really easy to roll your eyes at those skills, but those are by far the most important things. Um, and again, those are skills and roles that transcend any industry.
Right, exactly. Yeah, amazing. Thank you. I'm kind of veer off my questions because I saw one of the questions that one of the students submitted. It's Crystal's. Crystal is here. Um, she said, would you say, and this is, your experience, of course, it's hard trying to find a career path with an IR degree. Like, is it hard identifying? I thought that was very relevant, to what you said. You've been in different industries and, I would be interested to hear your take on that.
That is a really good question. I think I asked somebody that same question, like an alumni, when I was at St. Joe's. I think it depends how you look at it. I remember being a sophomore and thinking, I'm getting an IR degree. I'm going to do international work. I want to work for a development company. I want to work for a politician. Um, and then I remember being a senior and thinking, I'm interested in why people experience what they do based on where they live. That is what this degree and my faculty taught me to think and to wonder and to ask. Let me look at jobs that let me do that. And that led me more towards a localized nonprofit center and away from that internationalized focus. But all issues are local and global. Everything is interconnected. There is always going to be a way you can use your degree. Um, my role right now, it's super American and Canadian. It's not super, super international. But my degree is in health policy and global health. There's always a way to use that muscle. And I meet people with IR degrees all the time. The executive director of the legal services organization I worked for, my first year out of St. Joe's, had an IR degree. My interns right now, two of them have IR degrees. The VP of marketing at my current company has an IR degree. It's popular for a reason. It's one, really interesting to study, but it's also an interdisciplinary major. And I think the people that are going to hire you and review your resume know that. And they know that you're bringing multiple disciplines with you. So to answer your question, no, I don't think it's hard, but it depends on how you look at it. If you're just trying to apply for super IRE political jobs that are really competitive, tend to be localized in only a few cities in the US or internationally, it's going to be a little bit difficult. But if you are more creative and imaginative with what your career will look like, I don't think you'll have a problem.
Great. Yeah, thank you. I thought that was a good question too. So great. Um, so I know this references a couple different industries, but are there certain trends that you see in your industries, that you could share with us, that maybe students should be paying attention to?
Sure. I would say if you're interested in education or education policy, look into inclusivity in education, but also things like reading wars. All over the country, there are conversations about what kind of books kids should read, what content they should be reading, whose lives and experiences should be in the books that they're reading. This is a symptom of a larger political issue that we've been seeing in our country and across the world, right, the last decade or so. But it's hyper present in the lives of young children. Keep up with that news, know what's going on, be able to talk about it. If you apply for anything in education, you're likely going to be asked about it. Um, in public health, I've seen a lot about inclusivity, but especially the social determinants of health, which kind of means the factors that influence people's health based on where they live, work, learn, and play. Public health programs all over the city have been talking about how do we bring our work directly to consumers and clients so they don't have to come to us. That's an important trend that I think is really interesting, especially as we think about accessibility. And then pre-law, if any of your pre-law students, I really, legal services is constantly doing something innovative, which sounds silly when you think lawyers and public interest, you don't really think innovation. but there's a lot of really cool work. There's an organization in Center City that walks around screening for legal services or legal needs with iPads. Um, that's crazy to me that lawyers are doing that, and that, they're putting on their Nikes and walking around the city doing work like that.
Right. Yeah. Well, this kind of relates to that. Several students submitted this question about, a day in the life. Like, are you sitting at your desk all day? Are you out in your Nikes? Like, what does a typical day sort of entail for you?
If you had asked me this question when I worked at Philadelphia Legal Assistance, I would say I'm never at a desk, because I wasn't. I was doing a lot of outreach and engagement. In my last role, I worked between Philadelphia and St. Louis. I worked for an educational tech company, and our headquarters was in St. Louis. But I had a very community facing role here in Philadelphia. So, also a lot of running around, not in Nikes, in dress clothes, talking to funders and just different kinds of people that, like policymakers locally or on the state level, that I needed to talk to get my organization's needs met. Um, and now my role is really different. I'm at a desk basically all day, which a younger version of me wouldn't have been okay with, but I'm enjoying the work that I'm doing now. I also am a part-time student, and I'm running around at Temple after work. It's kind of nice to be at a desk all day. I work remotely, and my 9 to 5, I spend half my day doing education policy tracking and half my day doing external affairs and communication. So a lot of like, how are we communicating externally, whether that's reviewing tweets that interns write or reviewing policy memos or op-eds or writing op-eds. And then if I have to go to school, I take the Broad Street line up to Temple and I go to class for a few hours. If I don't have to go to school, I do my 5 to 9, which is my small business consulting.
Yeah, could you talk a little more about that and how you develop that and what exactly do you do?
Yeah, so I think this speaks to the importance of networking. I found that every time I left an organization, they had a need still that they weren't able to fill, and they asked me to do some freelance or contract work. And it got to the point that I had 3 local clients, and then I had 4 clients in Florida that found me word of mouth. And I realized, oh, this is a lot of work. And I'm basically making a second income. And it's also really fun and I like it. Why don't I standardize this or formalize it in some way? Um, and I think if I had heard someone say that when I was 21, however old you all are, I would have thought that's crazy. That won't be me. That sounds really hard and confusing. It's not. I'm just doing the thing that I like to do the most at work, which is strategic planning and grant writing and talking about funding for small nonprofits that kind of need help. And I'm finding a way to, pay for grad school by doing that. I opened a small LLC. My sister and brother actually helped me do that because they're more business minded. And I've been operating for a year now and it's going really well.
That's amazing. Great. You have so many irons in the fire.
Yeah, trying.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm going to shift to another couple questions from students. This is from Grace, and she's wondering, what do you find the most rewarding in your jobs?
um, that's a good question, Grace. In my consulting, it's really meaningful if one of my clients gets a really big grant and is able to run a program that they either haven't been able to run before or that they'd have to stop running because of a budgetary reason. Nonprofits are really, really tricky in that they're so reliant on funding. And I really like being able to help them kind of take a deep breath and know that it's going to be okay and they'll be able to serve the clients that they work with. Um, in my current role, I think the most rewarding work is getting to work with superintendents in Pennsylvania, especially Philadelphia, and explain to them some national policy around education or in Pennsylvania that is moving, what it means, how to talk about it, how to lobby on behalf of their students and families, and kind of see that light bulb go off in their heads and know that if they're invited to Harrisburg or to City Hall to meet with people, that they'll communicate really effectively, yeah, and get their needs across.
Okay, great. And I guess kind of piggybacking on that, um, do you see people burn out? I mean, I'm sure that's rewarding, but is there a part of the job that you feel like could get old after a while? Like, is it a high turnover field? That type of, you know,
That
along
is
those
a
lines.
that is a really, really good question. So, American Reading Company is not a nonprofit. Um, and it has been an adjustment for me in that the nonprofits that I worked at, I did really high impact work with immediate reward. I was really community facing, um, but I wore a lot of hats. I would say the job I do now, as far as time goes, is probably takes me 25% of the time that my last job as a manager of a nonprofit at a nonprofit goes, which is something to consider. For me, it was really important to work in a place where I knew I was going to get a lot of skills that I might not get somewhere else. But I did burn out. I burned out at my first job and my second job. And I think I've learned my lesson now. And I was really careful as I was thinking to leave, my last job I left in August. When I was looking at nonprofits versus corporations, I kind of thought, okay, I'm going to try to work for a company that I'm aligned with. ARC is worker owned, we're women and queer owned, we're completely sustainable, right? It's aligned with my values, but I know that they have resources and the capacity to take care of me as an employee. So something to consider as you're thinking about what kind of industry and path you want to take.
Yeah, amazing. We did a little bit of work on values also. And I think, when you're a student in class, it's sort of hard to imagine how those play out. But speaking from someone who's been there, um, it's easier to say, oh wow, that this aligns with my values and the way that it could potentially influence your day to day. So I love, to hear you say that. Um, let's see. Well, you answered a lot of these. So Max is wondering a little bit about your path to get to Temple. Could you walk us through like what was your interest in that program? Basically, will that land you somewhere else? And what are your plans?
Sure. Well, when I was applying to St. Joe's, or applying to college in general, I wanted to study public health. Um, but for some personal and health related reasons, I really couldn't go that far away from where I grew up, and also where my doctors I had as a child were located. So I was born in North Jersey. That's where I grew up. St. Joe's was a perfect 2 hour radius. And St. Joe's, for me personally, as a student with an illness, they were incredibly accommodating, which is why I chose St. Joe's. I chose IR because if we didn't have public health, I wanted to do something that was interdisciplinary and interesting. So I studied that, but minored in health ethics. My first job out of college, as you guys heard, I spent a lot of time in clinics and public health centers, which really kind of formalized that interest. And that was when I started applying to grad schools. So public health was kind of obvious for me. I've always wanted to do that, but where I wanted to go to school, I wasn't sure. So I applied to 5 schools off the top of my head. UNC, Temple, yeah, UNC, Temple, Hopkins, Penn, and Drexel. So I was trying to decide, am I staying in Philly? Am I moving to North Carolina or Baltimore? Ultimately, I did get into all of those schools, which is really great. And how I made my decision is I was thinking about, um, what I loved about my time in undergrad, but also what I didn't. St. Joe's is a wonderful, wonderful institution. I think I would send my child there. I would go again if I was 17, but our classrooms don't always represent what Philadelphia looks like and feels like, and the issues that I experience personally and that my neighbors and my friends do. So I knew I wanted to go somewhere that was a little bit more diverse in experience, especially like economically. Um, so right there, that kind of rolled out Hopkins. I also, just to be transparent, couldn't afford Hopkins. Same thing with Penn, could not afford Penn. So I was looking at UNC, Temple, and Drexel, and I liked Temple's program the best. I also knew that I would be going to school part time, and Temple was really, really great at centering the needs of adult part time learners, whether that's an undergraduate student or a grad student. Um, I have no complaints when I talk about my program at Temple. I'm in my last year. I'm doing field work right now. It has been nothing but wonderful and accessible and challenging, but also not challenging in difficult administrative or bureaucratic ways, just in that the content is hard and I have to do a lot of work. So highly recommend it if anybody's thinking about Temple. I have friends in the law school as well. It's really, really great. It's a great option. And if you're thinking about next steps, and again, you guys are a few years away from this, but it's okay to think about money and to make a decision based on what makes sense for you personally and financially. It was hard for me to kind of look at some of the best public and private schools for public health and choose Temple, right? Because face value, Penn looks great. UNC is the best public one in the country. John Hopkins is up there. But for me in my life, Temple made the most sense, and I don't regret that decision.
Great, great. Yeah, thank you for being so candid. Appreciate that. And do you have plans that when you complete the degree, or did you kind of pursue it for like a long-term sort of potential, furthering yourself and your opportunities?
I would love to pivot back into public health. I think I have no idea what I'll be doing next year or the year after, which is okay. That's like a fine thing. But when I think about where I want to be in 5 years or 10 years, I'd really like to be working in the government affairs office of a public hospital system. Um, I really like communicating. I like thinking about how to communicate to different stakeholders effectively to get an organization's needs met, to help an organization expand and meet more clients. And there are roles at public hospitals and private hospitals all over the country that let you do work like that. CHOP has a policy lab, they have a government affairs office, Jefferson and Penn do too. That's kind of what I'm thinking and what I would hope to do. And the role I'm in now, I never thought I'd be working for a literacy company, but I'm doing a lot of government affairs work, which I haven't done before. So I'm hoping this kind of gives me that experience that I need to, again, like pivot back into the industry I'm most interested in.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for sharing that. I meet with a lot of alumni, who are trying to pivot. They realize, oh, this isn't what I wanted to do. I want to get back to that. But I love that you said like literacy company, hospital, the average person would go, what? How is that? But there are clear, you know, there's a clear alignment there when you look at the work function you're doing and all of that. So, thank you for articulating that for us. Um, so a lot of the students' questions are similar lines. What I would like to ask though at this point is, a couple pieces of advice, just general advice. If you can think back to being a student and, it sounds like you had a little bit more experience than most. Um, but what type of suggestions would you have for students that are sophomores, juniors, and just trying to discern what's out there for them?
A big one is talk to your faculty and get to know them. Go to office hours, even if you have nothing to talk about. Um, Read the news. Um, yeah, I spent a lot of time in Dr. Fukuoka and Dr. Balioni's offices just talking. And I'm really happy to say they're my friends as an adult. That's a really critical relationship that I have that has been really helpful in my career. I've asked both of them every question under the sun. And if your other faculty members or anything like that, know that you can too. If you're thinking, okay, this is what I want to do senior year or after graduation, I have no idea how to get there, just ask a faculty member, ask an older student, ask a senior. Email me or another alumni that's come to talk to you. There's a reason we say yes to things like this. We received help when we were at St. Joe's and we want to help other students. I think that also speaks to networking. Just meet with people, ask them questions, learn about how they got where they are, and figure out what might make the most sense to you.
Yeah, that's kind of how we sum up networking slash informational interviewing. Just gathering that information, trying it on for size, possibly doing some shadowing, internships, that type of thing. So you're a great spokesperson for all of those. Does anybody else have any follow-up questions that didn't get asked? Yes, Crystal.
Would you ever consider being a full-time grant writer?
Can you hear that?
Yes. Yes. So my partner just asked me this yesterday. Yes. I have enough clients and enough income where theoretically that would be possible. I will say running a small business full time and having to rely on clients to pay you on time is difficult. Right now, I have the privilege of not having to worry about when my small nonprofit clients pay me because I have a full time job. If I was completely reliant on my freelance work, I would be okay, but there could be months at a time where I was just waiting for bills to come in. That sounds really boring and really adult, but it's true. That said, I think if I ever, wanted to pivot back into healthcare and the roles that I wanted weren't open and I saw a nice role for a grant writer, I would totally apply. I love grant writing. Um, and it's something I'd be happy to do for, again, like CHOP or Penn or Jefferson.
Well, thank you again so much for your time. Really generous, and we do appreciate that. And thank you for your patience with me.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.